Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find more information about us at officehours.global. You can, first hour is general discussion around media and virtual production, any questions that come up. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, this is our week between Christmas and New Year's, and this will be a bit of a us figuring things out, looking at trends. So today will be video trends, tomorrow will be audio trends. Wednesday, we have a couple executives from Zoom and a couple executives from Liminal coming on to discuss the merger. so anyway, so we will. So that will be. I sent the links out this morning, and so that's going to be. It could be a little busy. So my only recommendation is if you're going to come to the Zoom event, that you get here early. We do have a limited number of virtual seats, and we're not sure. And our link to office hours is in both announcements. so we don't know exactly how many people may show up. So just stay tuned for that. And then on Thursday, of course, we're going to talk about Office Hours 2.0 and where we're going with that, and talk to you about what you think we should do. Friday, of course, is trends, and then of course Saturday is education, as always. We won't put that on YouTube, and we yes, we do know it's the first, and yes, we had a great conversation on Christmas Day with the educators, so it was deemed a success. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions, and we're going to hand it off to Liberty. Take it away, Liberty.
Host, please.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. Anyway, go ahead, Liberty.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liberty White, and you are the producer of the show. So you want to make sure that you submit questions, vote up on the questions, and we will jump right into it. All right, take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Liberty. And as I kind of suspected, the first question comes from David Paskin in Miami, and it is, wow, Liminal is joining Zoom. What does this mean?
Alex?
I think we're going to find out on Wednesday. So I think that's my answer. I mean, we can talk about a little bit of it. I think that I don't actually know all the details about what's happening there. And I think we're going to find out a lot more from the announcements. And on Wednesday, we can ask those questions from them. But I'm pretty excited. I think that it's rare for a company the size of Zoom to have a company with real nuts and bolts production knowledge of their product. That's just not something that happens. I know it seems like it should happen all the time with every company. It just doesn't happen very often. And so, in knowing the team, knowing Andy and Jonathan, I just think that it's really exciting. Probably the most exciting thing that's happened this year, with only a couple days left. So but I think that we'll definitely be here. You'll definitely want to be here on Wednesday, and we get the opportunity to grill both some folks from Zoom as well as Liminal. So stay tuned for that.
All right, next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis has our next one here for the first hour, and it says, do problems come up if I use one device to control too many Bluetooth and wireless devices? My cell is now controlling two Pavo 2s, a Govee strip, the Flow 8 Elgato key light, and so forth. That's where he leaves it.
All right, Courtney?
Well, I would say probably not. With just the number that you have listed there, it should be no problem. Most of those lights are only sending small packets to tell it to go to a different level, or so they very rarely fill up the data network. The Flow 8, only if you're sending digitized audio, using audio going back and forth, that can use up a pretty good amount of bandwidth, and it can take some time for the other packets to get through, but not so use notice. I think it'll be fine.
Jeffrey?
The only issue I'd see, and I have to deal with this a lot, is when you go from one app to the other, it'll disconnect the Bluetooth and then reconnect the Bluetooth, and in some of these apps. So you just have to watch out for that, because you might be in mid-show or something like that, and you're struggling trying to get the Pavo tubes, for example, to change color or turn on or off.
Roscoe?
I find that to make sure you're using a powered USB bus, because if too much power goes out of the USB ports, the Bluetooth suffers, and then you may get disconnection issues. That'd be my one caveat.
Thank you. Peter?
Just to add on to everything else that everyone said, I mean, I have 13 devices just on my phone, on Bluetooth on my phone. So, and I've never had a problem switching back and forth and using that number. So I don't think the small number he's talking about there will cause any issues at all.
All right, next question.
Next one comes from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. And Mitchell says, if the broadcast TV target for audio is negative 24 LUFS and radio is negative 10 dBFS, should we consider updating the negative 24 LUFS for Office Hours 2.0?
I will toss that back to you, Bill.
Well, so things have been changing so much over the last 10 years, and it used to be that everybody needed to be broadcast compatible, and that was the big targets. And maybe this is actually even more relevant 15 years ago. There are more eyeballs by far now on the digital services than there are on the broadcast TV services. So unless there's a compelling reason, I can't see why the standard should go with an industry that is kind of in a bit of decline. And I say that with a heavy heart because I spent a lot of years in broadcast. But I noticed that even back 10 years ago, all the TV stations started dropping their engineering departments and going to hubs and things like that. So I don't think they are the standard the way they once were. So I wouldn't make a choice based on a particular industry. The standards organizations, I think, will be better suited to getting us new levels in the future and not looking that far back. My 2 cents.
Alex?
I don't pay attention to anybody else except for Mickey. So I'm not really worried about what other people do. It's only a matter of us discussing it internally and deciding what we want to do. I do think that we're probably going to change the move up to about negative 20. I'm discussing that with Mickey right now, and that mostly has to do with the fact that it just sounds low on YouTube. So when it has nothing to do with any other standards organizations or any other broadcast rules. It's mostly that when I listen to it on YouTube in AirPods, I notice that I'm turning it all the way up to the top, and I'm still sometimes having a little trouble. So my assumption is that we could probably afford to bump it up a little bit. The main reason that we had it at negative 24 was that many of the mics that folks had in the past couldn't get to 20. It was like we lowered it so that everybody would be the same, knowing that some mics couldn't get there, and we're kind of past that now. I think all of our mics that we're using now can make it, and I think we'll just have to have it be a requirement that people have to have a mic that can get to the negative 20 threshold.
Thanks to our ruthless reviews, of course.
Yes.
Mitchell?
I think as more and more people watch on their home TVs or TV sets, and especially Office Hours 2.0, I think we need to be consistent with the volume level that's out there, and that, of course, is the broadcast standards legislated by the FCC. So that isn't going to change anytime soon as a level setting. But I agree with what Alex said. We're slightly lower than the average level, especially when you're watching on YouTube.
Alex?
As someone who has to turn the volume up and down at all, completely, there's no standard on our over-the-top systems. So the only time there's a standard is when we're watching broadcast, and I don't know anybody that actually watch broadcast anymore. Like literally, I don't know anybody. Like my parents. My parents, no, they watch it on DirecTV. But there's just but it is. As someone who just only watches things through an Apple TV, like literally, that's the only thing I have that's connected to the world. The volume between HBO Max and trailers and Apple TV and YouTube TV and all of these are all different, and we're constantly adjusting for that, which is annoying. But I mean, I think that it is something that, and again, I'm only worried about the fact that when we turn ours on and listen to it, it doesn't sound as good.
And that's the most important
For us.
group
For
to
us.
be aware of. Next question, please.
Comes from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. And Tony says, I got a GVM 800D2 lights for Christmas, 3 RGB panels, hoping to set up in after hours. Will I need to use all 3 panels? What about newer lights to get rid of?
Roscoe?
Use these lights. Will you need all 3? Depending. Yeah, sure. Why not try and put them in or implement them? But we use these lights when we were shooting inside a parking structure. We're shooting small concert groups during COVID. And the one thing I'll tell you is that I hope they've improved it is you can only connect to one light at a time. Then you had to disconnect over Bluetooth and connect to the next light. So just be patient and know that you might want to, get to your lights early and play with them a lot.
Tony?
Yeah, these are way over my head. Way over my head. I'm used to my little newer lights that are, it was $45 for the pair. And so these are a totally different category. So I'm asking for help.
After hours, definitely. Sky?
I follow a director, and he talks about shading as your ability to break up the distance between you and your background. And of course, for me, I always want to make sure I can see the lights. I mean, see the eyes. Let the eyes are what's important to me anyway. And then the 3-point concept of a thing. Do you really need to see everything unless you're on a TV set where you're moving around and you don't have the ability to change lights or for a specific look?
Okay, Bill.
Have fun is the point.
Yeah, I was going to say
Good
when
point.
I started with these LED based panel lights and things like that, one thing that shocked me, since LED beads each work like a tiny spotlight, they tend to be more intense and a bit more focused than old broad sources that we used to use. So just be wary. I found myself turning them way down and even gelling them on top of that when I first started using those panels. And I eventually had to bring up my exterior lights more and iris down to get the same kind of look I had before with my tungsten lights that I grew up using and was skilled at. So they're a different beast, and just be wary of overblowing your lighting in the early days of it.
And just also take your time, be patient with yourself. It's learning. Whenever you're learning something new, it's new. You're not expected to learn it and know it off the bat. And that's why we have after hours for anyone who is new to watching us. If you have joined, you'll also get access to after hours, which runs 23 hours after 23, yes, for 23 hours after our show. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York is up next. He says, is there a way to make Dante virtual sound card more reliable with my X32X Dante card? Is Dante Via a better option? Would the RedNet PCIe Dante card and a Sonnet expansion be a better option if it was in stock?
Jason?
It would be a better option, but probably not for the reason that you think. The issue here is that you need another Ethernet port. If you're going to use Dante Virtual Sound Card, then it needs to be on its own completely separate Ethernet switch.
Alex?
You can settle it into the same one, but you do definitely need its own VLAN. So you can separate that out if you have a more advanced system that you can work with. It's hard to tell exactly all the things that are going on. One thing that does make Dante Virtual Sound Card much more stable is a piece of hardware that has a Dante chip in it because it'll clock better. Dante Virtual Sound Card is almost useless without some piece of hardware to kind of tie it to the ground. I have to admit that we're moving more and more. We have to make a decision about what we need out of a given computer. So if a computer is only going 2 channels in, 2 channels out, we've been leaning more and more towards some of the Avio, their basic USB to Dante connections, because we have limited, or our confidence in Dante Virtual Sound Card has been eroding over time. It just doesn't seem to work 100% of the time. So I will say that we're having the same problem, and we have a pretty good setup. And so it's not, the problem really is that it's not predictable. It just drops out or stops working for unknown reasons and works for weeks and then drops out for a little bit of time. And that, for us, that's not an acceptable system. So we're not sure exactly what's going on for Audinate, but they need to tighten it up a little bit. VIA is not the solution from our experience. It's much worse.
Next question.
Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland is up next. He says, can Roscoe Jones share a link for that awesome light?
Roscoe?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I mean, go to any Chinese place and order one of these, any Chinese manufacturer and order. This is the remote. I looked for the link. That company, that particular order spot doesn't exist anymore. The less expensive you spend on the light, the more likely you to get the volcano effect. And this is actually an artifact. This is not something you desire to have going on in the background.
Next question.
Next question comes from Ernest Floyd in Bastrop, Louisiana. He says, I will be traveling extensively next year. I need to get a microphone that does not pick up a lot of room noise. Most of the places I will be staying will be in stone or concrete block walls with in-room AC. What do you recommend?
Courtney?
Well, don't turn on original sound. And one possible solution is Shure has this combo package, which is an SM58, which is a good dynamic microphone, along with this USB interface that's designed to work with this microphone and other microphones, since it has the ability to turn on and off phantom power. You won't need the phantom power for the SM58. You'll have to work that SM58 in close to your mouth within about an inch or 2 inches, and it'll eliminate a lot of the room noise. And for $200, it's not bad. The interface also provides in-ear monitoring, zero latency in-ear monitoring, so you can plug your headphones directly into that interface and get side tone in your ear if you like. And it also lets you hear the USB output out of your computer in those earphones.
Nice. Guy?
Yeah, it's funny. I shot a video 11, almost 12 years ago with exactly this, where I took a loud dehumidifier and put it in a room, and then took about 6 or 7 different mics, shotgun mic, handheld. Let's see what else is in here. Got a head-worn mic, Audio Technica. So if you watch this video, you could actually listen to the Rode podcast or all these different mics and kind of make the decision for yourself, and you'll hear how much room noise there is with the low-end $2,000 shotgun versus a $200 shotgun, and you can make the decision for yourself. But it's very compelling. 125,000 people watched this video, and a lot of thumbs up on this one. So take a look at this. I'll put the link in the chat and see what you think.
Thanks, Guy. Alex?
We have to send a lot of these kits out, so that have to kind of deal with this. And so our gold standard, and since you didn't say for any given price, our gold standard is either a Countryman H6 or a DPA 4066 into a MixPre 2, MixPre 3.2 or MixPre 6.2 with noise assist. That is going to eliminate almost all of the noise that you may run into. It is a $2,000 solution. But it is what I travel with when I go to hotels.
Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that it's hard to get around physics, and that inverse square principle, I mean, the farther the mic is from your mouth, the more room it's going to pick up versus the signal. There are some issues like pops and things like that, but I was surprised in my early career when I realized I thought I was doing the right thing by getting an ECM 77, which is a small Sony lavalier, but it is highly sensitive. And when I was in rooms, I once had it not be available, so I switched to my 44, the ECM 44, which was a larger capsule dynamic, and I was shocked at how much less room I got. So the technology that the mic uses and its proximity to your mouth are going to be the biggest determinants of how much room noise you get if you can't do what Alex is suggesting, which is put in a very sophisticated noise canceling algorithm via hardware or software.
Okay, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, what would Zoom's motivation be in investing in a business travel company when more and more are traveling less or not at all due to current circumstances?
Nigel?
Yeah, so there really are 2 reasons to acquire. One is vertical, one is horizontal, and I don't know the exact company we're talking about here, but a vertical integration would be the Liminal. Let's go deeper within a market. Horizontal would be, how do I find adjacent markets that I think I could bring something in to disrupt and take market and grow my opportunity. So my guess is they found something they think they could bring to that market that would disrupt it, that they could grow their market with.
John?
I presume Douglas means American Express Global Business Travel, which is an entity that's getting into the hybrid business. And so as we move forward, there's going to be a crossover and transitional space from, traditional all digital versus hybrid versus all digital once again. And so they're hedging their bets here. That's what's going on.
Agreed. Bill?
Well, I also think there's one more thing. Is Zoom is just growing with an amazing curve up. So it may be that they're spending more time trying to manage their travel through an outside thing. I mean, they must travel because they've got global reach. So I'm wondering if part of it is just that they wanted to bring that in to have more control over it.
Alex?
There's big business in travelers having to deal with connecting to virtual events and other meetings over something. So the question we had just before this was, how do I jump onto Zoom from remote while I travel? And so I think that the angle for them is that there's a lot of people that need to solve that problem.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware is up next here in the panel. He says, what's the most important lesson you've learned from office hours this past year?
We'll start with Tobias.
For me, it's been non-technical, sort of, which is the importance of strong conversation facilitation or moderation in a Zoom meeting, which should be applicable to all meetings probably, but especially here, we see how fast you can have a conversation if someone is directing to the next person. And now it's happening kind of invisibly, but it used to be just with the physical hand raise, signaling to the facilitator who to call on next. And so that's really applicable to any Zoom meeting.
Nigel.
Yeah, I've learned many things over the last year, but the one I probably enjoyed most is the color grading stuff that I'm learning. Now, how good I am doing at that will probably change from day to day because I try and do it every day. And now I'm trying to get this HDR thing right. And I've really enjoyed the intellectual fun of that.
Mitchell.
For me, the most interesting lesson I've learned is I can still be entertaining and funny without relying on harsh language, or as Alex calls it, fissionable content. As a radio guy that's come through the ranks, it was always important to push those barriers, and you don't have to. And that's the value lesson that I just learned from office hours, and I thank all of you for that.
That's a great lesson. Alex?
Well, I had some inkling of it. I think that this year I've really learned so much about how you can really build an online community that feels like a community, like, that feels like we're connected and that we know each other. I know the folks that are on here better than anyone else, and I think that that's outside of my family, and I think that that's a fascinating puzzle that I expected it to be something that was interesting like this, but I didn't. I think that I've gotten much more clear of how, how connected folks can be, even though they've never actually been in a physical space around each other. So it's really interesting.
Jason?
I continue to be surprised at kind of one of these prescient terms, which is the opposite of the demotivational poster about meetings. None of us are as smart as all of us.
Yeah. Roscoe?
Acceptance. I thought that I struggled with certain individuals, and I thought the community would rise up against certain people, kind of things. And yet the community has embraced and engaged and continued to show me what an incredible community it is by accepting people wherever they're at. And I think that's just an incredible lesson.
Very true. Courtney?
Well, I learned that even during a global pandemic, and we're locked in our rooms, or at least have less of a tendency to go out in public, that we can meet with fellow people and make new friends. And I've also learned discipline here. Thanks, Alex. And as far as controlling conversation and participating in conversation, and I get to do my favorite hobby, which is troubleshooting. And you don't have the ability to do that if you're not working anymore in retirement, or prevented from going out and being in public.
Tony?
Don't be afraid of failure, and don't be afraid to try new things.
That's always a good one. Sky?
Shiny is fun, and we talk about a lot of shiny things, and sometimes they're expensive, but the value of something is what will it last. And what I've learned and what I've received and what I've observed is that community really is king, and that this nutrient-rich environment of a positive attitude and coming alongside one another, you physically can do things far outside your pocketbook and literally do the impossible. So thank you. That's what community is for me, and office hours is that.
I will plus one what everyone has said, and just that there is a place for you out there. You might take a while to find it, but that's what office hours has shown, that there's room for everyone. Next question.
Bernard Bernstein is up next from Newton, Massachusetts. He says, I've been out of the Zoom scene for a while. Is meetingsmeters.com still a thing? Is there a way to upgrade video quality when not in a high cost level?
David?
So it looks like Meeting Meters is in beta testing or currently under maintenance. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be ready for prime time, at least at this moment. But for as far as upgrading, getting a better quality, I think there are two things. One is grab yourself a Facebook portal, have it join any meeting. It'll automatically bump up your meetings because it's seen as a Zoom Rooms device to 720p. The other thing is reach out to Zoom and ask them, say, can I please have 720p? Or if you're on the business plan, you can ask for 1080p.
Guy?
Yeah, exactly. We had Meeting Meters as a project that Jonas and I were working on to bring these Luff style meters into any meeting to help people out. And there was something with the API and something that was just too difficult to overcome. So we shut it down for right now while Jonas decides what to do with it. So it's kind of in limbo right now, but it was able to bump up meetings and more people were using it for that than meters. So it's a project that's just on hold.
Thanks for the update, Guy. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, what is your cleanest capture solution for phone calls into your productions, not Zoom?
Jason?
I've enjoyed the Dante Bluetooth interface quite a bit. It's just one of these beautiful hacks that works pretty much no matter how you slice it. My next attempt is going to be Angry Audio's Bluetooth capture, what is it called? Gadget, I think. I've ordered it, but they're out of stock and will be for quite a while.
Jeffrey?
I'm assuming that you're talking about people using last minute type interviews and things like that. Otherwise, we have home kits that we send to people that have cameras that go up to 8K that we use, and we'll control the phone and then send it out and record it and then put it in production and post-production. Other than that, I will use something like Restream to get the call up into the cloud, because not only will Restream record it, but I can record it too. So I'll have an ISO of the video.
Mitchell?
Plus one on the Angry Audio gadget. It's a wonderful device. And again, it's much like a lot of the devices that are being developed by broadcasters to allow talk shows to continue. Broadcasters like Comrex have a device that incorporates an Opal codec, which I think is built into some browsers and some phones, allow you to get a high quality connection into your audio system out there. And there's one I think it's called Call Me or Call It. You go to a website where you've been invited and you click on it, and your device, like your phone or your studio, can plug into this and make a beautiful connection, low latency, back to the studio.
Courtney?
Well, for years in audio, we've been using devices from JK Audio, and they make a variety of solutions specifically for interfacing phones of various types, either cell phones, Bluetooth, POTS lines, etc., VoIP phones, into a production where you can hear the people on the other. It's a two-way conversation, and you can get a clean audio feed into and out of a phone of any type.
Thanks. Alex?
Yeah, we've owned a lot of the JK Audio hardware, and if you're talking about just someone's going to pick up a phone and call you, that's the way to capture that, where you don't have any other software or anything else to handle it, and you're not going to have any choices. I think that's JK Audio makes some pretty great solutions for that. If they can connect on a computer or browser, I've also been brought into shows using squadcast.fm, and it will record all the ISOs and then send them back and realign them for you, which is useful.
Thanks. Next question.
The next one comes from Jonas Dattel of Stuttgart, Germany, and a friend of the show here. What is your favorite support system or software?
John?
My last two companies that we use this product called Fresh Desk. It's now Freshworks because they have other products other than support. This product's super affordable. We've had up to 40, 50 agents working off this one platform, and can't recommend it highly enough.
Guy?
Yeah, Zendesk is what we use. It seems to be pretty popular. I like it because we can really follow up and make sure that nothing slips through the cracks, and we can pass and assign tasks and updates to certain people that are on the team so that we know what's going on and we can follow up and make sure that it got done. So it makes, for all the avenues that we have different things flying at us, it's nice to have a repository for everything. So I like Zendesk.
Thank you. Next question.
The next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, in my recent travels in my camper trailer, I've decided I need to invest in a better desk and chair for the camper for a light sub 15-pound setup. Does anyone have a folding computer desk they would recommend?
Jeffrey.
That's a big ask right there for 15 pounds. Mostly what I would do is that, and it really depends on what type of camper trailer you have. If it's pop up, if it's a pull behind the truck or whatnot. So I would probably end up designing something like that and be able to bring it in from there. And you're in an area where there's a lot of RV parks that have great options that will show you some really cool ideas from there. For the chair, look at a Cozy Roadie, because Cozy Roadie has a foldable chair that goes right into a Pelican case, and you can store it easy.
Next question.
Next one comes to us, right there we go. Next one comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. Why do producers come to the Zoom? I see 120 plus of you. If I were not on the panel, I'd be watching live via Mukana.
Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a multi-part thing, and it's probably part of Alex's process. When you go to the global website, it actually gives you the link to the webinar. So that's kind of where you start through this process of hopefully one day becoming a panelist and being incorporated into the community. And that's always sort of been the case. Then Mukana, you get the link through that webinar chat. But by then, for me personally, even if I'm not actually going to be on the panel, I still join the Zoom so that I can join early, listen in on the conversation. Plus, the third thing that you have to think about is now I've already been trained to join this webinar, and it's on my calendar. So I'm always just going to click the link and go from there.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that ease of use is the number one reason people go into Zoom. It is a little bit less latent, so when it's a little closer connected. And the hard part really is when we have two different latencies. And so if you're watching on Mukana, you're a little bit behind because it's using the YouTube link, which is about 20 seconds behind, which doesn't really make that much of a difference from the Q&A, but it can affect the chat a little bit. Now, where we're going is that all of it's going to be on YouTube. So there won't be the show itself will really occur on YouTube for most people as we move forward. But that has to wait for 2.0. We're testing the 2.0 system right now. And we'll continue to kind of go down that path. So that's kind of where we're going with that. But I do think that our whole email system up until now has been really leaning also on that. So it's a daily thing that I don't have to think about that goes out. Well, I have to think about it a little bit to update it, but I generally, it kind of solves itself and it kind of constantly grows. Now we've already slowly put in a MailChimp system inside of the web page. We're kind of slowly adding all the little bits and pieces that we need to kind of expand that and get ready to have it be something that just occurs on the web page with Mukana, and that with 2.0 will kind of, well, what we're planning right now is that after hours will exist all the time, and that the panelists will come into a breakout room, and folks can go into another breakout room and watch. so those, if they want to, but the main show that you actually see, you won't see a complete show except for through Mukana, probably by February.
Tobias?
Yeah, just to explain why the question came out, is that if I'm not live on the panel, then I like being able to pause, then skip a question that didn't relate to me, and also I'll access it after the show if I miss the show, also via Mukana. So it's just my consistent go-to place by default.
And our goal is to get to where you do that more often. So you're just in the future.
You're already trending, Tobias.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next one comes from Brad Moore in North Fort Myers, Florida. Santa brought a bit of discretionary income this year. Does purchasing a decent microphone make sense if my office is acoustically terrible? I work from home on mezzanine tier overlooking a large family room that has high ceilings and so forth.
Let's start with Jason.
Rarely will you get somebody on this panel to say, no, don't spend more microphone money on a microphone. But I'm about to do that. Off-axis rejection, just so you know, is what matters here. And the closer the microphone is to your mouth, the less the room matters. But if you've got a mezzanine, I think your best bet for discretionary income would be acoustic treatment, some sort of paneling to kill the echo.
Alex?
I know that I would not be allowed to change the mezzanine acoustic treatment, for in my house. So I think that, given the politics that might be occurring in the house as well, I think that the other thing that, once again, a mic with high off-axis rejection, like a PR40 or a SM58, would probably cut an enormous amount of that sound away from you, as long as you got it close enough to you.
Courtney?
Everyone's addressed the microphone issues pretty well. The other thing I would get is headphones for the kids if they're playing video games down in the family room.
Very true. Bill?
I think it's all been covered. I'm going to pass.
All right, next question.
Tobias Moss, Minneapolis, is right back again, and this time he says, any tips on leading a successful campaign to get a large audience, a congregation, school children plus parents, and so forth, to improve their Zoom setups? I want to create a culture of people joining better.
Alex?
I think for that kind of organization, we have different ways of kind of approaching that when we're talking to folks. But I think for that type of organization, I would really lean into giving them a specific list of what they actually need that at different price levels. So that, and Roscoe's got some great lists of those things that he puts together. But having a specific place, like if I want to spend $50, this is going to make my event better. If I want to spend $500, this will make it much better. And then I would start talking about, how it impacts everybody else. So when they join, when there's a lot of noise, when there's a lot of other things, it's like them kind of making a lot of noise during a meeting. Like when they're, when they don't come across well, it's as if they were shuffling papers and doing other things, during a meeting. And really the fact that the whole meeting is losing energy when people aren't really prepared. I mean, and we're obviously a good example of that. And then the final thing is just being a good example, always coming in with a relatively good setup.
Roscoe?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. The list I put together is called the Golden List, and it's under tips and tricks in the education channel, specifically designed for teachers from the get-go. But the other way that I've found effective, I give my students, my directing students, a ring light, a Polson, and a Polson microphone, and a Tech Rise, the old Tech Rise, because I bought a whole bunch of them back when they were inexpensive. That's about a $30, $35 kit just to seed. So if you can just give a group of people, if the group's small, obviously you might just give it to them. But if you can just give some of the key leaders, give them kind of this stuff, they will help the rest of the congregation, the rest of the people see that it is an improvement, and hopefully the buy-in is low enough to where other people will go along.
David?
I love this question in part because I know Tobias and I are thinking about the same communities that we're trying to up the game. I would say though that in our communities, the religious communities, we also want to make sure that the barriers to entry aren't too high. We want to make sure that everyone can feel that they are a part, they have something to contribute. So I think for our communities, for religious communities, I would focus on the people who are presenting, who are leading, who are teaching, and for everyone else, let's just get them in there and share the experience.
Bias?
Yeah, I share that instinct also, David, but also I want to raise the game, and I think people will enjoy being in interactive space on Zoom more if the average is higher. Already in our various events and services, maybe 2/3 have their cameras off, but that still leaves a pretty big 1/3 with their cameras on. And if they get too far ahead, I think that the others won't ever turn on. So it is a tough balancing act there.
Mitchell?
I spent $20,000 building the best Zoom room I could so I could tell other people how to build a $200 Zoom room, because it breaks down into like 3 stages of fixing things, and it usually is a matter of fixing. It's like most people that have problems with their Zoom calls, it breaks down like this: bad audio, bad lighting, and then maybe a bad camera, and then there's other things that can be done. That would be stage 2, but let's concentrate on stage 1. So let's concentrate on a decent microphone, a decent light, decent camera. That's the best place to start.
And Tobias, I'm just going to jump in for a second. And when you say campaign, are you thinking of, like, in that true sense of the word, of something to get them engaged? Because we are talking very tactical. Just wanted to double check.
Yeah, I'd love to get it towards the idea of a campaign, as in before every event, do 3 Zoom tips show up on the screen? Or do we email before any big holiday, a reminder set? Or do we organize a bunch of volunteers to get out there and visit people's homes and give them their pointers in person? So all kind of that campaign, I think, is where it needs to happen.
Perfect. Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go from there. The biggest thing is you're inviting somebody into another person's home, and a lot of these setups might be in a bedroom or something like that, and they just don't want to turn on a video because their bed's messy or the kids are playing or something like that. In a small community, especially a congregation, you can always get a group of 4 people, make a panel, and then make an event of it. And so you say, okay, next week we're going to go to Tobias's home and we're going to help him set up and kind of record the event. So by next week, when Tobias is on the next Zoom call, they can see the difference, the before and after, and give people an idea of where you have your ideas of where you're going to be going or want people to go with their Zoom call, and how it will make their experience a lot easier and better.
Sky?
I've pondered this since March 2020. And the question that I was asked was, how do we have a conversation with one another? And then the other question that was asked is, how do we get out of the way, the technology out of the way of that conversation? And I'm really listening into David and Tobias in what is the value that the person at the other end of that is receiving from it? And then watching my wife in trying to teach children for a year with the screens black and the economic issues, the challenges and I think what I'm trying to find is, how do we affirm those rather than shame that are wanting to and needing to be a part of the conversation? And that's where, how do we get out of the way of the conversation, David? I see your head nodding, because I think that's the heart of this question, not the how cool is the tool.
Yeah, I would say too, just from our experience, I remember when I was at the state and we were working with the tourism operators, and they weren't necessarily, some of them, not very tech savvy. And what we did is we used comedy, and comedy is always like touch and go, but we over exaggerated the need for them to sign up. We over exaggerated the need. So we turned it into a campaign where we poked fun at the things that we needed them to do. And just echoing what Jeffrey said, it's always easier to show than to talk at, and people feel like you're really connecting with them. So just tying a bow on that there, and we can head to the next question.
Fair enough. Let me click on, there we go. I see X-Rite color checkers are largely out of stock. Any idea as to why? Restock time, alternatives?
All right. And Alex?
It might be that a lot of us are buying them. So we've had this problem on and off over the last 2 years, is that when it starts to spin through our system, you'd be surprised at how few are actually in the system. These companies don't sell X number. So if we create a wave, they suddenly have to make more. And a lot of people have been talking about X-Rite within after hours and other places, and even here. So it could be affecting the overall availability. Usually if you bounce around a little bit between B&H and Amazon and Adorama, Film Tools, you can find one of some sort of size. There's the video size as well as the pocket size. Both of those work fairly well. The main thing is looking at resolve. The reason that we're very specific about the X-Rite or the Chroma Demand chart is because they are accepted as an automatic color correction tool within Resolve. So you want to look at the list of available pieces in Resolve. There's lots of other color charts, and there's lots of swatches that you can use. The reason we use those specifically, or we use the Demand charts, is because we are specifically interested in being able to do an auto color correct within Resolve.
Okay.
Yes, because Charles, the question last week was asked, so what's the best card? And even though I have the little pocket version, I like this with the new cameras. And then I bought it early, and I do have it because I bought it early because Charles suggested it.
Smart move, Sky. Roscoe?
Be careful buying them in the used market, just because they do fade over time. The inks fade, and so they will not be as accurate. But if you get them for a great price, they'll be better than nothing.
Tobias?
If anyone knows if the color checker color rendition chart is a equal alternative, let me know in the chat or the Discord.
Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, up in Canada, says, to the panelists, can you describe what makes a good and clear producer? Question. Yesterday, I asked a question in 2 ways. The second way was much clearer to the panelists and led to a great answer.
Jason?
I'd say first, figure out if your question is abstract, meaning about a big whole topic, or specific to you. If it's abstract, roll your question around in your head over the course of a day, and revise it throughout the day as you learn little things, do research. If it's specific, give us only the context we need to answer your question and avoid stuff like, the best this, unless you want to be shocked at how much something can cost.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is we just have to have a clear point to get on our way out. so we have a lot of times when you're talking about broadcast, you're like, you have to know how to get into a show and out of a show. And so sometimes folks, when they write questions, will not give us the data that we need to answer that question, or a clear, really a clear question into it. And sometimes it's an open-ended question and we just talk for 15 minutes because we were interested in it. But a lot of times, if we're not clear of what you're trying to solve, we have a hard time trying to figure out what that is, or if we don't have all the information, like you might have I think that what you did in the second question yesterday was that you had a couple more specific things of these are the specific parts of what I'm trying to solve. And that's what allowed us to kind of close in on the answer.
Agreed. Mitchell?
Yeah, concentrate on the question, not a statement. If you make a statement, then you're not really asking a question. Just ask the question and it will become very clear.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, and the most important thing is to keep it as simple as possible. Try not to use acronyms too many times, and get your data in there. And I find that a lot of the questions that are asked, the second that question mark shows up, anything after that is pretty much stuff that could be thrown away and won't help us in solving the puzzle that you're trying to put together.
Yeah, and a lot of times when we have the question in our head, and when you actually write it down, there are some things that get lost in translation. I know from my personal experience. So I read what I wrote as if someone doesn't know what I'm saying, did I put enough details in the question? I remember your question from yesterday too, and there were more details in the second one. Alex?
And my only last request is to read it out loud before you post it, so that you get rid of some of the, remember that Bill or somebody else has to read it. And I think sometimes the missing punctuation, that wasn't the case for Morgan's question yesterday, but missing punctuation or oddly phrased subjects can make it hard for the question reader to know exactly how to talk to it. So that's another issue.
Next question.
Comes to us from looks like Khalid Al Jamaya, and I hope I didn't get that too badly. In Hassa, Saudi Arabia, has anyone heard about the AFX auto and manual focus control system for Blackmagic Pocket 4K and 6K cinema cameras or similar technologies? And he links, it looks like AFX autofocus adapter Indiegogo, so it's an Indiegogo project.
Roscoe?
Yeah, I mean, I just looked up what you posted, and this is a Lidar-based autofocus system. And my first thing is put hands-on is what's important. If I got my hands on it, then I'd say yes or no on it. But outside of that, I look for an influencer, a photo Joseph, or somebody to review it that I trust. You build up those relationships that people have. Alex, I've taken Alex's recommendations over the years. They've always paid off very well. So, and that kind of stuff. My thing is, first off, I'd want you to find a parfocal lens. I think that's actually more important. Most of the time, these are not going to work for any fast active type situations. So parfocal lens and an operator are hard to replace.
Courtney?
Yeah, I looked this up, and it's basically a Lidar-based digital rangefinder that will send focus commands to your camera. And the problem with some of these is since it doesn't really use any AI to determine where your target is in the frame, you have to choose an area of interest, a spot in the frame where that's going to be your focus, and then point your camera at that spot. And so if you're person you want to maintain focus on moves out of the sweet spot, your focus could shift to the background, and without any kind of eye tracking or other type of intelligence, and no physical readout other than the distance on the LCD on the back, you'd be hard pressed to know where the focus is going to land. So, although it may be neat and it uses Lidar, it may in practical use you may find it problematic. That's what I'm thinking.
Alex?
I will say that I think that Lidar is probably the future of autofocus. And we're seeing that if you look at the new Ronin, the DJI Ronin, I think it's the Ronin 4, their new system, what they're doing is, if you're talking about autofocus, they're shooting a Lidar system in real time. They're letting you still do follow focus, but you actually see like a plan view of the Lidar dots. So you can actually see where the focus, what's in focus is like a little bar. And as a follow focus, you can sit there and just look at that and be keeping the nose or the head or do whatever you want. And you can actually see the 3D geometry while you're doing the follow focus. And I think that is going to be the future. The big advantage of Lidar is that instead of 36 points or something like that, it's thousands of points. The next step, as Courtney alluded to, is that you have to figure out what to do with those 1,000 points and what does that mean and what does that look like. And I don't know if an Indiegogo is going to have the AI required to make that decision, but Teradek is working pretty hard at that. They've got some Lidar-based systems. Again, DJI is really running down that path because they've been doing Lidar for a long time. So I think that we are seeing a new brave new world when it comes to autofocus. But you're pretty much on the front end, and I would always wait for an Indiegogo to ship I've made the mistake of even recommending something that they sent me to test as an Indiegogo, and then I recommended it because it worked well for me, and then it never came out. And so I've kind of chosen to take the hit of whatever the cost is to just let it mature and come out the other end.
Okay, next question.
Tobias Moss is up next from Minneapolis again. He says, please discuss the overlap between smartphone products and studio products. How smart is your studio? What home products became studio products or vice versa?
Courtney.
Well, there's usually very little overlap in the professional world between studio products and home-based products. Home-based lighting control never works in the studio because in the studio you get in the studio with 50 people and phones and autofocus controls that are on the same frequency as your 2.4 gigahertz. Home controls will pretty much render a lot of that stuff unreliable in a studio situation. So I usually try and keep home-based apps and things that use the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi or Bluetooth out of the studio because it's just going to be more problems than you're willing to deal with.
Jeffrey?
For me, my studio is in my home, so there's a lot of one and the same. Of course, I'm doing a just simple YouTube type stuff that I don't need to have to worry about things like security, like if I'm recording something that it doesn't get leaked out or anything like that. When you get into something with security, you probably have to separate things up. But I kind of like the idea. If I forget to turn off the TV in the living room, I just tell my Amazon Echo that to turn the TV off and go from there. So that works really well for me.
Mitchell?
I don't see the overlap either. I think I agree with Courtney. My home is on the other side of that door over there. And in the studio, I need to be quiet in here. So I've got the phones muted, the dogs muted if I can. And I can't afford to have an Amazon or a Google product yakking at me while I'm trying to read radio copy.
And Roscoe?
Things that are low power based that used to only be in the home, like UPSs that would only work for home things, have now come into the studio because studio equipment it needs less power than it used to in the past. So that's one area definitely. And then Bluetooth has snuck in. There's things that showed up on Bluetooth that have, I use in this. My studio is a college studio. We don't have the big budget, so we're always looking for innovative ways to. And my last thing would say, inexpensive things or free software is always a good thing to bring in if it works. I'm a big DaVinci Resolve believer.
And Alex?
I find myself going the other way, where how do my studio products end up in my home? After some frustration, I'm in the process of getting ready to replace all of the 4-foot KinoFlow light, not KinoFlows, but just 4-foot lights in my kitchen with production lights, so that I can control color. Because right now there's some kind of horrible 4,000 degree greenish weird thing that affects my cooking shows. So I was like, if I just replace all of these with real bulbs, and I take, as you've seen, I take bulbs with me when I go to hotel rooms to replace my background colors. So I think that I'm going the other direction.
Right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, how will we enable mobile users to listen to the show when we transition to the YouTube first experience? Will mobile users be able to listen to the show without paying for a premium YouTube account? And he notes, I use the Zoom client with CarPlay all the time.
We'll start with TJ.
So if you look at the Mukana screen at the top left corner, you will see a little speaker with an arrow. And if you push that, you will get the live audio from the show that is happening now. And it works great on mobile. I use that when I'm out and about driving and want to listen to the show there. It's on every Mukana pane. It's even there. If you look, if you have the 3-column view with the YouTube embedded in the middle, top left corner is the audio.
All right, next question.
Next one comes to us from where? Next one comes to us from Jonas Datel in Stuttgart, Germany. How can I test if a playback encoding solution keeps the HDR without spending lots of money on those expensive test patterns?
We may need to.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'm not
Okay.
used to raise my hand. I didn't raise my hand on the last one either. I was like, oh, she just went on, and I was like, all right, that's because I didn't raise my hand. I don't even remember what the last question was, but anyway. But the so there's a little bit of difference of keeping the HDR as a complicated question. So HLG doesn't have anything to keep. It's just a matter of looking at it. What you're going to want to do is look at that output. Number 2 is that HDR10, of course, is going to have metadata, and that it could theoretically be keeping or throwing away. I don't even think that YouTube keeps the HDR10 right now. And then Vision has metadata for every frame that's coming through. So that's a much more complicated problem. So when you talk about keeping the HDR, I think that one of the things you want to look at is the ability to have a device, and that could be an Apple TV, it could be something else, that's going to go out into something that's going to digitize it, and then it's going to go into something like Nobe, omniscopes, and so then you can basically throw them into that. You of course have to have a stream or an output from your Raspberry Pi or whatever that is obviously not protected by HTTP. But once you do that, you can go into something that's going to digitize it, like a mini recorder or something like that, and then it's going to go into a scope system. Then if you have that scope system scaled properly, you should see it in the 0 to 1000. Now, if you have it not scaled properly, it'll look like 0 to 10,000. So you have to kind of get those scales proper. But once you do that, Omniscope should be all you need to know whether your input is coming in as SDR or HDR. But it's a difference between it being mapped correctly and it being tagged correctly. So it could come in and it's mapped, but it's not tagged as HDR, and it's an entirely different problem.
Okay, next question.
Looks like the next one is coming from Jonas Datel. I'm just waiting for it to cycle here. Okay, currently working on a test pattern there we go. Currently working on a test pattern test tone generator. What is your favorite tone or pattern?
Guy?
Yeah, this one's from Sienna. So if you take a look at the screen, you can see that this is one of
Everyone pulls out their headphones.
You're sending tone, Guy.
Whoops, sorry.
1K at a lot of dB.
Live demo here.
Yeah,
All right,
exactly.
Is it out?
It's out now.
Yes.
Okay, I muted that. Sorry about that. He wanted to hear test tone.
You got it.
You got
That
it.
is 1,000 cycles.
Okay, so so here is the 4K UHD 3840 by 2160. Then there is also this one here, which is pretty slick. So this is all Sienna. I can't remember if this is the paid version or not. And then down in the bottom left, let me actually show you guys the app so you can see it. Down in the bottom left, this is where I accidentally, sent tone through, but it's right here. Audio settings 48. and then I muted it. But you can see that you can go -20, -12, I'm glad I didn't send -12. That would have really rocked your world. Anyways, that's it. Sienna it's Mac only at the moment.
Alex?
Yeah, my favorite tones are ones that I can control. So being able to have a test tone that you can set at different levels really helps, if that's possible. If you're just working for video playback, I would stick with 1K. But a lot of times I like to have things that I can test at different ones, because especially if you're in a larger environment, you want to be able to test among everybody that's there. And so that might be something to look at. Of course, there's pink noise that you may want to be able to push into a system. So that could be for a variety of things. And then most of the test patterns I build are channel checkers. So I am literally identifying every channel that's going out of a system. So I might, so that's often for me, it's 514, 714, 916, 5.1, 5.1 SMPTE, 5.1 HDMI. So there's a whole bunch of different versions of that, and I have to identify each one of those as well as stereo. One tip is that if you're going to identify the channels, make sure to have somebody else, preferably of a much different vocal tone. I use my wife to do stereo. So if you're doing left, right, because I'll be doing left, front, right, left, right, right. Like I'll be doing all these other things, and having somebody else running down the path with left, right, that you can clearly understand as a different person. So for me, my favorite ones are all channel checkers, and they're all a bit more complicated than this. From a test tone, I would look at a lot of them. The gold standard for test patterns is SRI, and so it's Sarnoff Research International are the best to test everything. So I would definitely look at what they're doing as best you can, and we're hoping to get one for us soon. So we'll see. Go ahead.
And Courtney, quickly.
For test tones, I like to have a sweep from a constant voltage sweep from 20,000 to 20 to 20,000, so that I can check for deficiencies in the signal passing through passing through the system.
Okay, next question.
Peter John Goulden in Santiago, Chile is up next. Where is the education link with the start list Roscoe mentioned?
Roscoe?
I just dropped it into Mukana, but just so you know that every morning right around 6:40, Chad or someone will drop in the Discord link so that you can join the Discord. So you do have to get here early in order to get to that Discord.
Thank you, Roscoe. Next question.
Next one comes from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia, up in Canada. He says, for Liberty, great work hosting. For example, great how you reread Tobias's question and guided the answers back to the campaign aspect. So, just a comment, and a nice one.
Thank you so much, Morgan. I've also learned that throughout the years, but also Alex showing and telling us, like, as the host, I'm also here for the audience to make sure that they get what they need as well. So just double checking that question with Tobias and then redirecting. So thanks for that, Morgan. Next question.
Mitchell Hill, looks like in Wilmington, Delaware, says, do you have a favorite audio processor for your microphone and why?
Jason?
Like the Aphex channel because it is many different effects that you would want on a vocal loop, but all of them are informing the other ones. So it is impossible, for example, to let your gate mess up your compressor and vice versa. Even if they're too high, they will all inform each other. It also gives you lots of outs. So for example, here I can be in my office without having to deal with the X32 in my studio.
And Mitchell.
My favorite processor is the one over my shoulder that I use for voiceover work. It's a Neve 8801. It's just really smooth. And what's interesting, quick side note, when I asked Sweetwater, I said, price is no object. I want the very best audio processor, and that's what I ended up with.
Alex?
Yeah, for me, I'm doing a fairly clean output. It is mostly just the noise assist that I'm using for that process. And so outside of that, I don't process my audio that much for live. I process it a lot when I'm doing it in post, but I do that with Post Tools.
Next question.
George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia is back. Has anyone tried the last cable kit that uses plug-in connectors you leave in the ports on your devices, then connect magnetically to custom USB cables? Replaced 7 fixed custom cables with 3 last cables with the common magnetic connector.
Alex?
That would scare me a lot. So the idea that things will just pop off. I get the thought process that it could accidentally pop off. I mean, you could actually, instead of pulling one of your devices forward, but even with even with the USB that we have now, I tend to tape them to my, like I spend more time trying to make sure that they're almost surgically attached to what I'm doing when I'm doing production. My number one fear is that something's going to get pulled out. So a magnetic connector for that would be very frightening for me.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I tape all my cables too, unless the connectors actually have the little threaded screw hole, and then I'll get those special caps that you can put on there to tighten right down onto the device.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'd be afraid of this, and passing power through pogo pins is always a bit of a dicey, situation. If those pins are rings that make the connection get dirty, and if it's going to stay in your device all the time, and you're not going to have the cable plugged into it, stuff will gather on it, dust will gather on it, schmutz will gather on it, and then your connection won't be very viable. Plus, you can't charge multiple things at one time because you just got one cable that's plugged into power.
And our last question of the first hour.
That made me want to say Peter Piper passed the power through pogo pins. Spotting Scopes recommendations. Looking for a kit to use in birding with the Lois's project. Besides smartphone adapter, what else is needed for zooming outside of virtual tours and remote office hours productions? And he is looking at Ghost Sky products.
Alex?
Pogo pins in Pittsburgh. Anyway, so for this, I'm not using anything specific. I've got some big lenses, that I'm using for when we start doing this for Blackmagic. So I've got a 100 to 400 Canon lens with a doubler on it, which is set for, then that's the lens length for for full frame. So that'll be Super 35. We'll do a magnify to that. So I have a feeling that I'll have a pretty good throw to it. I've used it to look at the birds. The hardest part is following the birds with a long lens. So that'll be the thing that I'm the most challenged with. But I'm excited to try to use that, because then it's all inside of my normal video pipeline.
Bill?
I'm really interested in this too, because I live on the edge of a golf course now. I haven't for decades, but the fowls that fly are fabulous. And I'm actually interested in one of the new binocular set that allow me to take a picture of them. So if anybody has any comments on those, I'd love to hear them as well as this goes on.
Okay, thanks. I'll hand it back to Alex.
So we have, thanks Liberty, by the way. And it was very well, Liberty, you're getting better every week. So it's quickly passing me. so anyway, so well done. So thanks so much for showing up on Monday. It's great. Really great to have you. Our questions for the second hour, really dealing with this whole week, is all about trends. What trends do we think are going to go forward? And specifically, we're going to spend the whole week kind of talking about that. Even Wednesday that we're doing the special event with Zoom and Liminal, we're going to be talking through those trends. So the opportunity for us is to kind of discuss, what those things might be. What should we be paying attention to with video? And we've got a lot of questions already starting to stack up. I was going to have kind of an open discussion, but we've got enough questions to get started. I think we'll go ahead and jump into them. We don't have a lot of people raising their hands yet. So maybe our panelists don't have anything to say about the trends, but let's go ahead and jump into them and see how they go.
Okay, Bill?
We start with Jonas Dattel in Stuttgart, and he says, with the current supply chain issues, will we see video productions increasingly going to software solutions?
Alex?
I think in some cases. I mean, I think that I still feel like mission critical stuff is still going to be harder to do in software. I think you're going to it's going to be a slower uptick in software, because software still does things that people don't expect it to, in a way that hardware tends not to. Hardware tends to be more limited. It's limited in geographic region. It's also limited in what it can do compared to it. But oftentimes we can ask our software to do things that the hardware can't do. And that's the part that I think that hasn't been solved all the way across the board. And so I think that I think that there's a trajectory that says a lot more of it will be done in I guess you can say, yes, it's going to be increasingly done in software, but I don't know how fast that uptick will take.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, and I guess
Yeah,
I
yeah.
should.
No, go keep going. Keep running the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I just finished an accelerator program, a pre-accelerator program with Techstars. So they just from the investor side and what they're looking at, everyone was asking, are your products, are they SaaS and software as a service for those who are looking at that, which goes towards the line of, yes, people are looking software, but as Alex said, mission critical is still going to need to be hardware, but just putting that out there, what the business community, and if you are looking to build things, where they're looking at because of the supply chain issues. And then we'll go to Joe.
I would say that no, they're not. And here's why. I think when you look at the end of 2019, the A10 Mini came out. All of these other successions of them have come out since. The number of small to medium-sized events that are trying to do hybrid on a shoestring budget with those small devices, I think what you're going to see is a lot of lock-in. Like, people are going to get used to that ATEM software control, and they're just going to stay there for a long time.
Bill?
I think there may be a generational component to this too. I mean, I know that I grew up typing on typewriters, so tactile feedback is very important to me. And we all saw the Butterfly keyboard hassle that Apple had, where people were just insane over the fact that a small change in their touch of data entry really bothered them a lot. On the other hand, I watched my son's friend once. I was giving her some information, and I was typing in with my thumbs on my phone, and she said, "Do you mind if I just grab your phone?" And I gave it to her, and she increased the speed of data entry by 1,000 times because she was a native touch typist on something without any tactile feedback. And I just think that there's a generation that's growing up who do not need as much of that as the former generation did. So it's going to be interesting to see whether these virtual on-screen non-tactical solutions grow as this generation comes up and as our generation ages out.
That's a really good point, Bill, just from a generational perspective. David?
I guess that makes me old because I like being able to feel the buttons underneath my fingers. I also think that there's something to be said for thinking about the integration of software and hardware, right? I'm thinking about Keynote on a Mac M1. There's just nothing like it, right? It's blazing fast. And so when we do when companies do what Apple is doing really well, which is really owning the whole ecosystem, they give us both software and hardware solutions that are just can't be beat.
Alex?
Yeah, and I think that you can see with Office Hours 2.0, we're mixing and matching those things fairly effectively. So we're having, Isadora and Universe, really building a software interface for people to run something. Of course, that's only a couple steps away from going into the cloud. Again, the reason that we're doing it in hardware is because there's a lot of things that we're doing or plan to do that would be very hard to do in the cloud at the moment. We all know where it's going. We all know it's going to that. But if I want to sell a large client on, again, for me, I'm trying to figure out how to do for Office Hours, movie, like bringing in movie producers to talk about their movies and be able to say, oh, can we get that clip in, HDR and surround, because we can actually play it back into the stream. No one else can do that in the world, and so I find that it's a good place to be, is a place that no one else can do something. And so we're investing in that, and it's allowing us to figure out a bunch of things that other people will need to do in software down the road. So I do think that the software is powerful in the sense that we now can run Office Hours from anywhere. Anybody can open up a web page and just start running it. It's still, we also see some of the pain of that right now because it doesn't work all the time. The one thing that I think is interesting though is having the hardware interfaces for what we want to do in the cloud. So, I have different pieces of hardware all around me that do different parts of my interaction. And I think that a Stream Deck is not enough. Like Stream Deck by itself is not enough for me. I need the things that are designed with the buttons where they need to be and how they need to be. I use Stream Decks a lot. I've got 3 or 4 of them. So it's not that I don't think the Stream Decks are useful. I just don't think they're a solution for virtual production as by themselves. I think that if Blackmagic put the software that they have for the switchers in the cloud and let their hardware that they've already sold everybody run that software in the cloud, they would wipe everything else out. like, like if they just put the system and so your hardware system, your Extreme, was running a system that was a piece of software only that just simply did that thing. I think it would be very, very frightening of what would be possible, because then I'd have the hardware interface. I'd have the ability to go local if I needed to, but I'd also be able to go into the cloud.
And Courtney?
Yeah, what you call a software solution actually introduces another point of failure, because not only does the software have to be solid, and software solutions are constantly moving targets and are constantly being updated, and those can create problems. And that software has to run on something. So it's running on a computer, and a variety of different computers. You're dealing with a whole different chain of possible points of failure on that computer. So a hardware-based system is a fixed, on a fixed environment. It knows what its firmware is only dealing with its hardware, and it knows what its hardware is, and doesn't have to deal with the outside world as far as getting its job done that it's designed to do. So using a software solution introduces this additional point of failure, which I think makes it tougher to use in a critical situation, a broadcast situation.
Next question.
Nick Justician in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, our old friend of the show here, says, where are things going for remote over internet video production control?
Jason?
Hey, Nick. Been a while. Haven't talked to you. How you been? I'd say what we need to do is standardize a protocol so that companies who are making things that need to adhere to that protocol understand it and get it adopted. The other side of that is that there needs to be a protocol that is either proprietary and inexpensive, or open source and extremely adaptable. The combination of those two, I think, would make everything easier. Or, of course, the ATEM in the cloud thing, of course, would be masterful. The hard part is, how do we secure it? How do we authenticate it? All the frameworks that are designed and involved in making sure everything like that is, as hacker-proof as possible is what's next.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that the thing about remote video control, and what I'm going to do is specify this is not in the cloud or not anything else, but taking over hardware somewhere else. You're seeing us experiment with that within the Belfast method. In the Todd Reynolds project is also these are both places. What Victor, the Caheo concept, all of those things are the idea that we're going to take over remote hardware. I think that one of the things that's important is only getting hardware that can be taken over. So the depth of the APIs, SDKs that are available for the hardware becomes more and more important. It's one of the reasons for a long time we chose Blackmagic, was because they gave us the most access to every little bit of the hardware that we had there. And so we were able to cobble something together. We definitely get into challenges when it comes to other pieces of that puzzle. But I think that it is, this is not a new thing. Bloomberg has been running, Bloomberg and Canadian Broadcasting have been running remote studios where they have one technical person on site, and everything else, audio, video, lights, everything else was run remotely. That's been happening for the last decade. So this is not, new technology. It's just that it's newly available to a lot of us. I think that, I know for O9O, we're not going to build any kits that we can't remotely control absolutely every aspect of the kit, as we go into by the middle of the year. None of our kits that go out will be able to change the color and the brightness of the lights, run everything else remotely, or we're not going to put it into the system. So I think that is a key piece of the puzzle as we go down the path.
Next question.
Next one comes from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, square video, vertical, horizontal, what trends do you foresee regarding these formats or others?
Sky.
Well, again, how do we look at something into the future? It's because we see something from the past, and there was IMAX, there was 70 millimeter, there was Cinerama, all of which were amazing, huge, big tentpole experiences. But my forecast, mobile. Everything's going to be going on some kind of a mobile delivery device because it's just easier and people can be more influenced by a thing that's in their hand.
Alex?
I think we're going to see more and more hybrid productions where it's built for both at the same time. So there's, we have the resolutions now to shoot something horizontally that we can then reframe, vertically. There's some of the products that are out there, have the ability for they have even AI solutions to kind of reframe for you. But you can also do it as an editor. And I've done it myself with some of the stuff that I've done for where I publish one thing to YouTube and another thing to TikTok. The YouTube is still 16:9. The TikTok is still 9:16. And so I think that as I think about that, I think about it less as being limited to one of these and more of how do we have the outputs feel native to the given platforms and shoot at a resolution. I think it's one of the arguments for shooting at very high resolutions, whether it's 4K or 6K or 8K. How do we shoot in those resolutions that we can reformat it, pan and scan, essentially what we've been doing for TV for 50 years or whatever, just pan and scan the story back to something that makes sense.
Roscoe?
But as long as the eyes remain horizontal on the human face, I believe widescreen is where everything will return to for relaxing purposes. Then there will always be small devices that you hold in your hand for vertical.
And Courtney?
This has been an age-old problem of aspect ratio. It's gone from 3:4 to 16:9 to 2:3:1, et cetera, in film production. Quibi tried to come up with a solution to this with their format that would adapt to horizontal or vertical, and we saw how well that did.
Alex?
Well, I don't think we want to learn too much from them. I mean, I think that the video, the adjustable video format was actually that Quibi put together was actually a pretty ingenious way to handle that. The problem really is that the kind of content that they created was not interesting to anyone. It just wasn't compelling. And so, I mean, you still got to get over the fact that something has to be interesting. And TikTok has proven that you need very little production value to be interesting. If you keep it short.
Bill?
One of the things I've been keeping a half an eye on is the augmented reality space, because I do think that as we move toward more content coming in, and I'm not saying this is specific about the goggles or glasses approach, but a little strip of data here or there that doesn't occupy as much of your field of vision might be really useful in navigation circumstances and other things. So I think as the industry continues to move from just content consumption, where I agree with everybody who said 16:9 is pretty natural, I think that's going to continue. But the data delivery into your field of view, I think, will cause more different kinds of rasters to be useful for those kinds of navigation purposes.
Yeah, and this is also an important question. When we look at last week, I think the news shared that TikTok is now the most visited website in the world. So they've surpassed Google and they've helped to usher in that whole portrait mode. So at the end of the day, you want to look at your audience and where we're going so that you're not left behind. Next question.
Next one comes from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, and he says, Office Hours 2.0 going HDR is how far ahead of the curve of other talking head shows? 1 year, 3 years, infinity?
Alex?
For talking head shows, probably infinity. Well, probably 2 or 3 years at least. Our interest is more in the overall experience of pieces of the second hour specifically, and it's just easier for us to do it all in a talk. The talking head lets us update this, and I will say that it looks significantly. I think that the HDR looks significantly better than most things I see on YouTube, on my phone at least. So I think that it is a subtly better looking show than almost everything else I see on YouTube on my phone. It's just because the colors are richer. The contrast is a little higher. It just snaps for me. If you have an HDR phone, which is a growing number of people have a HDR display that they're watching on. Of course, we are going to have an SDR version that probably most people will watch in the beginning. So, but I think that the concept of having shows where we can cut in seamlessly HDR content and other things like that, I think is very compelling. So if we have an artist that we want to bring in and have them do their piece, and we're able to seamlessly put it into 5.1 with HDR, that's something no one else can do. And again, that will attract people, and it also kind of helps us continue to stay above the fray of what's there. I've said this probably even a couple times in this show. I don't like being places where other people are. So I like being way out in front and finding, and figuring out what those things are. By the time everybody else catches up, it's usually time for me to move on. And so my goal is for us to stay way out in front and take advantage of the opportunities because there's going to be a handful of people that want to solve that problem. Film companies who want to show off their product, music, even there's just some things that are from an experiential perspective. When we get into doing stuff, let's just say we figure out how to do that with birding. These birding things will look better than anything else that anybody's ever done in wildlife. Even some of the cooking stuff could look pretty amazing in that area. The way to do that is to do it every day, not to do it for this one event. Like, we want to try to do HDR, we're going to sell someone on something and do it HDR at some point in time in the future. Now we're going to spend 3 weeks planning or a month planning. We're going to test for whatever. I'm just testing every day, and I'm getting used to it every day. And we're going to keep on, improving our solution for understanding what makes good HDR. And as we add 5.1, what makes good surround. And we're just going to get to a point where creatively as a group, we understand it. Will we use it in this show? I don't know. Not all the time, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, but we will all understand it. We will all, if we go out and do an HDR show or a 5.1 show, because of the fact that we're in that environment all the time, our brain will have become accustomed to listening for the different speakers and seeing the difference in contrast and seeing what looks good and what doesn't look good in HDR. So it's not that it affects this show, it affects how everybody in this show views every other piece of content. And that's the thing that I'm most interested in.
Next question.
Next one comes from Matt Cool in Montreal, Quebec. Says, when did endless jump cuts and breath removal become acceptable in video editing? It goes against everything I've been taught. Is proper editing a lost art at this point?
Roscoe.
Well, I'd say we're actually returning to the beginnings of film when images were first put together. I put the link into the first film that's credited with having actual cuts put into it. And were they jump cuts? Well, you have to look at them. They're entire scenes. There's no close-ups and that kind of stuff. As we've gotten into close-ups, then jump cuts have become disturbing, because if we're far enough back in the scene, we see where everyone's sitting in relation to each other. It's only when we get in close that we start to get disturbed, when people start jumping around on us. So I would argue that as more people have gotten into production, it's become much more acceptable. Many more people are producing footage, and they're just ignoring the fact that they're disturbing the audience by moving people around.
Sky.
So I started in the industry in nonlinear editing, and right at the edge of going from tape to tape. And consequently, that low barrier to entry allowed me to understand how to make an edit happen at an affordable expense. Well, now that everybody is an editor because everybody has an iPhone, they haven't been, as you say, taught to be an editor. And so the proper concept of telling a story is still a thing that we're just now beginning to learn, is as a thing, as Alex was talking about earlier, is it needs to be interesting, if not entertaining. So consequently, the low barrier to entry of equipment, I think, is where it came from. Now, stylistically, every week you're going to find a new style. Personally, I kind of celebrated the jump cuts, because in my cooking show, I didn't have the B-roll to make a radio edit and then cover it with B-roll. So that a jump cut was a style, because it was so prolific on the internet and on YouTube. I kind of celebrated because I needed to get stuff and content out quickly, and I didn't have the money for B-roll.
Courtney.
Yeah, Sky touched on it. I think styles change, and the big problem is traditional storytelling through media used to be try and make the media itself transparent so that the story comes through. And so you wanted smooth cuts, smooth transitions, stable cameras, and all that. And this kind of brings up a story. I was doing commercial with Vilmos Zsigmond, famed cinematographer, award-winning. And we were at lunch, and Vilmos says, I had to interview on the commercial yesterday. They said they saw my reel and they're looking for something else, someone with more edge. And he goes, I can give them edge. I can shake the camera. And they're always looking for something to stand out. And now the only thing left to stand out is all the bad practices that we were taught not to do in film school. Lens flares. Look at West Side Story and all the stupid lens flares that are in that movie.
and it's a stylistic addition to make it stand out, make it look different from the other, the older West Side Story. So they're always looking for an edge, and now the only thing left with an edge is doing things wrong.
Bill.
This question pulled me back to 1985 and the first time I saw Max Headroom, and the energy that style brought to TV at the time, MTV and things like that, was something I had just never seen before, and it made an impact on me. And as I watched through the years, I realized how those seminal moments when somebody invents a technique or a whole way to do things that catches on in the popular consciousness, the language of the whole thing changes and can change forever. And I think we're still a little bit of that legacy from that. Not that nobody had done that before, but that was such a cultural moment.
Alex.
I mean, the same conversation happened when I got into Photoshop. When I was in Quark and Photoshop, there were all these Cytex operators and these folks that had gone to art school and everything else, and complaining about the whippersnappers who are doing everything wrong and everything else. And we did a horrible amount of things wrong and did horrible things to print. Like Raygun was a good example of a magazine, for those of you old enough to remember it, that was unreadable. Like unreadable. Like you couldn't, it was just the most. But we found something on the other side of that revolution that was much more interesting to look at. So the design that we settled, what we did is we went way too far to one direction, and then we slowly came back to something that makes sense. And I think that there are places where breaking the rules can, make sense. I think that if you look at parts of the Matrix, not the current one, but the original one, you're seeing some places where we started to break some rules. I think that Man on Fire by Tony Scott, I think if you watch the edit, there's all kinds of those rules being broken, but in a way that tells the story, in a way that keeps moving it down the path. So I think that, a lot of times, and I will say that once your brain gets used to it, as someone who watches a fair amount of TikTok, that you get kind of used to it, and then I will admit that the active camera, you get so used to the active camera that older stuff is harder to watch, just because it's not moving fast enough. And I realized that there's something about that where we're constantly waking the brain up with those jump cuts and everything else, because it's not something the brain normally sees in the real world. And so it's like, wow, that just happened. And so I think that that's part of why it is aggressive. It's constantly kind of feeding a lower brain thing where it's constantly tapping on us. And now I think that might be making us crazy too. So I think that there's a possibility that it's not good for us, but I think that it is stimulating parts of our brain because it's constantly choppy. I think that keeps us watching it, but kind of possibly in a way that we're a little mouse and they're feeding us sugar. So,
right. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when so much hardware is based around consumer operating systems, Windows embedded, for example, what is the advantage of hardware over software if the underlying workstation server is reliable?
Alex.
Well, number one is it is less reliable as we add those consumer, anything past Linux. And even with Linux, I mean, we have problems with Linux machines that are based on that. And then they, but generally, if you don't update them, they keep on doing it exactly the way they were doing it. It's the fact that those may be consumer versions, but it is a known piece of hardware. They defined it. They defined this hardware, the video cards, the CPUs, the storage is all very defined and tested and burned in, and then people are using it for in many things. It's FPGA, which is not truly a full operating system. It's going to be very low latency and very limited, but also very powerful. And so, and even then they crash. They still will crash, but oftentimes a lot less. The hard part is an undefined hardware system with a piece of software added on top of it is a recipe for potential disaster.
Mark?
A lot of what Alex said. I think that a lot of the systems being designed today are not so much using Windows embedded. It's just gotten to be too big and needs to be updated too much. And they're using systems that are specifically using offshoots of Unix, and they can talk more directly to the code. And that makes it a much more reliable system.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones is up next from Brea, California. He says, in 2022, can software-based production systems have enough failovers to be used in mission-critical projects?
John?
Every digital first event we do, we have 2 TDs, and they have basically the same setup, usually either vMix or Mimo Live. And so they both have all the content loaded on their machines. And so we haven't missed a beat. We've had a couple of guys lose bandwidth in the middle of the show, and the other guy took over. No client didn't even know there was an issue. So it's been really working well for us.
Thanks, Roscoe. Thank you, John. Great question, Roscoe. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, when Grass Valley announced K-frame control panel support for the AMPP platform, they mentioned TDs playing the console like an instrument. With the rise of software-based production, will we have the opportunity to build that virtuosity?
Alex.
Yeah, I think that's why we need custom. We're still going to keep on building custom pieces of hardware that we're going to interact with, for most of those things. Even if we move to virtual, we're still going to need some interface to work with it. You can get to some degree where you have that, but even when someone uses an ATEM and they open up the software and they put it on a touch screen and they say this is the future, we always know that eventually they're going to find their way back to hardware. so it's because it's just the tactile of being able to move things up and down are going to give us a better production experience. And so it can still be all virtual, but I've known folks that have got way out ahead touchscreen mixing consoles, and then they, 2 years later you come back and it's all hardware again because they need to be able to feel the sliders while they're working. The hard part is they have to constantly look down because they can't see the tactile nature of things lets you keep on looking up at what you're doing and then finding it with your fingers and you get used to it. Whereas a screen, it's difficult to do that.
Bill?
I just always continue to flash back to that young lady I mentioned earlier in another answer who was my son's friends who took my phone away from me, and watching her use two thumbs to enter content was as virtuosity-like as watching Paganini play the violin. So I think the younger generation will always find a way to exhibit virtuosity if you give them a chance.
And Alex?
And I just want to underline it. I think you're right, but I think that the issue is not being able to look. You have to look down all the time with a screen. So when you don't have something that is a predefined piece of hardware that you're interacting with, you're constantly looking at the screen, and that makes it hard to do a great number of things when it comes to actually doing something live.
Will that change, though, if Apple gets the eyeglasses thing that everybody hints at going?
No, because you still can't feel it. You still have to. Maybe when it's a heads up and it's right in front of you. But the point is that maybe, but you're still looking at something else. When you're when you're switching a show, on a hardware panel, I don't have to look at the panel to know what I'm doing. I can reach over and just feel for something while I'm watching the show. The key is I don't have to look down at the show to do something. With a touch screen, you have to look down all the time. Like you're always looking down because you can't feel your way around where things are. Now, if they get haptic correct where I feel like I feel buttons or something down there, maybe. But right now, without haptic control, I can't pay attention to the content and execute something at the same time. Like that's the fundamental problem with touchscreens. And to be honest with you, with Stream Decks, is that they don't, if you only have one page, it's one thing. But as soon as it's multiple definitions, I can't just reach over and do something.
Muscle memory. Next question.
Jason Robertshaw, Sarasota, Florida, says his office hours a DAO, distributed autonomous organization, usually applied to digital currency cooperatives, but I see parallels in the structure of office hours, digitized, decentralized, and demonetized cooperative. Is DAO the future?
Alex?
Well, I'm just glad that it's not DOA. That's the thing that, it's only one letter there.
Initialism pun. You don't see those very often.
So I have to research it some more before I would say whether it is. I mean, it is definitely digitized and decentralized, and demonetized to a lot of degree. And so I don't know if I would, but I have to. I actually, this is not an area that I've spent. I haven't really organized it enough that I would be willing to speak to it yet.
Jason?
The only thing I would add to that is we're 100% not run on blockchain, although we do like NFTs.
And come back for more conversations on that in the new year.
Yeah.
Next question.
Tony Mobley is up next from Noonan, Georgia, our friend. He says, I'm working with an elderly congregation that is looking to stream on YouTube in February, thanks to After Hours. Their brand account launched yesterday. Any other suggestions going forward? A Zoom webinar, low cost, please.
Tony.
So this is the congregation that I started working with before I became part of Office Hours, and they are sort of at the heart of conversation with Tony Mobley and anything that I've done. I basically have come to office hours to get information to help them be more productive. And as they are not moving at the pace in which I would like for them to move, they are moving at an accelerated pace based on who they are and where they are. And so I wanted to, and it's a long story, but basically they were having Zoom meetings and they were not even turning the cameras on. Everybody's turning the cameras on. People are purchasing mics and they're doing really, really well. I just wanted to know if there were other things that the panel have as suggestions to help them move forward. They want to look good, but these are also people who are on Social Security and have limited income. And so I was just wondering if the panel had some additional suggestions for me to help them.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I think is exciting is that where we really start to see the power of online events is when normal people are getting into it and upping their game and figuring things out. Not the first movers, like not the crazy ones like us, but just average people trying to make their what they're doing more effective. And I think that so I'm excited about what Tony's doing because we're seeing folks that are not tech, centric, adding tech to something that makes it better. Again, I think that it's just a function of, literally a China ball and a light with a good headset mic and potentially an Ethernet connection to their router. I think that would probably be the most, for literally $50 for each person, $50 to $75 for each person. That would make a massive difference in what it felt like, to be in the conversation.
And Tony, this is for also some of the reverend and people who will be on camera. Is that what you were just referring to?
This is primarily, there's four female ministers and they want to look good. They want to sound good, but they have a limitation in terms of resources.
Okay, Alex?
I was gonna say, if I'm speaking all the time, I'd probably spend a little bit more money on it, but I think that you could get a long way for about $100. And then after that, but I would, if I'm the one that everyone has to listen to for a long time, then probably try to spend more money on it.
Sky?
Yeah, embrace the fear. I'm serious, because these people do not want to look silly. They don't want to look, they don't want to be embarrassed, and they don't want to embarrass themselves. And they're doing a lot of things that they've never done before to an audience that is outside of their control. And so consequently, the training of a thing and the hardware is 20% of your expense. Getting somebody, a help desk, a helper, you, if nothing else, to come alongside, and you've experienced that yourself, having people come alongside you. I think that is 80% of the value here, but it's time. So if you're not the help person, who is, and how can that be accepted by those that are also learning this brand new bicycle that they've never ridden before?
And Roscoe?
And I double down on what Sky just said, but also chat. In YouTube, that live stream chat can be an interesting place. So you do want someone there to monitor it, but at the same time, it is that entry point. Maybe people aren't, happy to be on camera quite yet, but at least they can interact over that chat. So unless you have a professional system like Mukana in place, then I think you need to go ahead and put some people and resources into that chat.
Okay, next question.
Next one comes from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. He's back again with, what tools or trends are you expecting in 2022 to help the one-person hosted interactive live show? ATEM Minis, Playout B, H2R Graphics, SPX are all things that jump out for me already from the office hours discussions.
Alex?
I think that one of the things that we do have to do is figure out a way that people can do it. We tend to break things up and let other people be part of the conversation so that, we have, I tend to want to delegate because I think it will always make a better show. At the same time, we need to find ways that using exactly what you've laid out there, ways for people to do it all themselves and have some, various, and we see gamers doing it all the time. Now, I will say that most gamers are creating what I would consider pretty low density content, which is fine. I think it works for the game, people watching it. But I think that we have to also have people pace themselves as far as what they can actually produce and what it takes to actually do it well.
Jason?
I read this one a little bit differently. So iOS remote screen control, for example, abstractly, as one-person shows become more prevalent, so too are the technologies that assist the adoption of those technologies. So for example, if beginners use mobile devices more frequently, the adoption of FaceTime for remote screen control can definitely become more useful as it becomes more adopted.
Sky?
Again, an exponential change of a thing. When I saw Manolo do what he was doing with Universe and that the interactivity ability of it, it was like we discovered fire for the first time. It was life-changing. It was instant. It was amazing. And I completely get that there's a huge iceberg underneath this tip of the thing that we're seeing that Manolo is doing, and many other people are experimenting and exercising with him. But my prediction is somehow Universe is going to be a conflagration.
Alex?
Yeah, regardless of the software, I think that it's important for us to really keep an eye on doing as much as possible. If you're interested in this, again, I'm just going to keep coming back to jump into Office Hours 2.0, jump into the Belfast method, the Todd Reynolds project. All those things are things that I think that we can learn more about it. I don't know what the software is going to be. I think that that'll get different. That'll continue to evolve. I do think that the purchase of Liminal by Zoom is going to move things very fast this year into an entirely different space. So I think that it's hard to model how much of a difference that's going to make, but I think it's going to be very, very exciting.
And then also collaboration. And that might seem a little bit flaky, but what I've noticed with a lot of folks who possibly use programs like Ecamm and even StreamYard, that you're seeing more and more people try to collaborate and support each other's streams, not just from a marketing perspective, but they also understand bandwidth of just one person. So I just see that we're going to see a lot more collaboration coming as well. And Alex?
The last thing I'll say is to try to, as quickly as you can, move away from one person. One person doing everything we have a big, especially if you're in this community, ask people for help. It's an opportunity for them to learn, for them to be part of production, for you to do your thing, and for that, and make friends, and some of that might mean that there's an investment, of time into making a difference for other people's projects before you start asking them to help with yours. So I think that is a process of learning how it works by being part of these these teams. But if you're trying to figure something out, it almost always works better when you have a team working on it and it's so hard to be the host and to be present with exactly what you need to say and be trying to figure out all the technical issues at the same time. That's almost impossible to do well. That is, it can be done, but it's not a great experience. And most of that'll be slowly left behind because what is always going to work a bit better is to have a small team or even a growing team, helping you with something. It might be just one person, running the edit, doing announcements, doing other bits and pieces so that you can stay present with the audience. But being present is super important, and it's really hard to be a one-person show as far as someone who's actually hosting and talking and trying to run the technical at the same time.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is up next, and he says, one of the normal elements that a local university was happy about returning to campus for is being able to gather safely at events. With the bonds we built within our community, do you think we could be a model for virtual connections?
Alex?
I think so. So I think, we've spent, there's a lot of people that were hanging out at Christmas, just talking about stuff and interacting. And I think that we are finding a lot of ways to do that. I'm not saying that it's a replacement for being in, and I think that when we get the opportunity, most of us try to find each other and hang out with each other a little bit physically. So I think that it's not something that's a replacement, but I do think that we have stumbled upon over the last almost 2 years, a different way of building a community that is pretty interesting.
Next question.
Next one comes up from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, beside the content portfolio, how might the subscription services, and he notes specifically Disney Plus, Netflix, and so forth, differentiate themselves in the coming year?
Alex?
The way I kind of think about this a lot is right now we we kind of grow, building a piece of content. Let's say we watched Red Notice. My wife hadn't seen it yesterday, so we watched it again, and which is a good, clean fun. I don't know if I needed to watch it twice, but it was, but Red Notice, came out, and the thing is that I thought about how much effort and time and money goes into a spend, and it's kind of like growing this great cow and then, just selling the hide. There's so much left there that was useful, and the thing is that I think that there is so many places of behind the scenes, and a lot of the behind the scenes that we've seen so far with like Mandalorian, and even the behind the scene, a lot of the added on pieces is so badly done, and so like high quality, really nice cameras, and just scraping along the surface of what happened there, and you can make that as that boring part. I mean, the Mandalorian barely. I mean, all of the behind the scenes. There's like hours and hours and hours of it. And there's like 10 minutes of useful content. And the thing is that there's no reason not to just give the geeks a lot more content to kind of dig into. There's also opportunities to build more and more content that isn't necessarily part of the main storyline. So the storyline can be, these 30-minute shows or 50-minute shows, but there could be little 5-minute things that are on TikTok and 10-minute things that are on that further build the experience of each, basically build the characters within that thing. If you never see those, doesn't matter. Like, you'll totally get Hawkeye the way it is, but there could be all these outtakes and all these extra scenes and all these other things that are across social media that you might collect over time and put them back into your service. But the point is, you could be putting out all this extra content that is related to it, but not replacing it or required. And you could even have Twitter accounts that are owned by the characters that are in the shows, that are tweeting as the characters, like things that are going on, and funny pictures of what they did today. And, so you could have the girl in Hawkeye, just posting on Instagram pictures of her good groupings of her archery, that kind of thing. So there's just constant building these characters up and doing those things, more behind the scenes, more storylines, et cetera. And I think that they're leaving so much on the table right now, because and so it'll be interesting to see if they take advantage of any of that.
NBC and Heroes did a really good job of that early on. Like, they had built out an entire microsite, so that kind of dates it, but with all the characters, and you could follow the one that you were most impassioned with. So that's great.
And Peter Jackson did this with Lord of the Rings, where he's showing us behind the scenes and taking us through walkthroughs for years before he released the films. And I think that those are the things that there's no reason not to keep on building more and more and more content around those things, and live activations. I think that group viewings would drive a lot more people to watching those films if we all knew. And I think that part of why they don't do that is because they literally can't withstand. I was talking to someone about it that might know something about this, and I was talking about how great it would be to get everybody to watch it at the same time, and they were like, yeah, that seems like a good idea until you get a couple million people watching it at the same time. He goes, our distribution systems aren't built for that. They're built for people to get it over VOD. So getting everybody to watch it all at the same time is not what we built this for, and it could cause more disruption. So I didn't think through that process very well. So, but I do think that that's another opportunity, is to do live viewings of it with the director. Imagine a director's cut that's interactive with the audience.
Bill.
My thinking about this is all come from the content consumer's perspective. I am getting a small, annoying frustration that is continually growing, and it is this. I'm subscribed to a dozen services one way or another. I think to myself, I would like to watch that. It's come across my radar, maybe in their menu system or something. And I say, oh, okay, so I can watch that for $3.50. And I really want to watch it, so I'm going to go ahead and click. And then the next day I'm looking through, and on one of my other services, that same content is there for free. And I feel like an idiot. And so the connection across the various services, as they're doing all these little verticals, and you're subscribing to not just Netflix, but Disney and Amazon Prime you have coming in as a feed here, and then Apple TV's feeds there. There's just so many different systems that sometimes feature the same content that I'm getting less and less confident that I'm making good decisions as I navigate across all these services. And I think the industry has to figure out a way to suppress this. And it's going to be tough, because if one service is getting $3.50 for me to watch that movie and another one is giving me the movie for free because of my subscription to it, there's a essential financial conflict there that has to be resolved, or people are going to start getting angry because they're going to start paying for a bunch of stuff that they maybe shouldn't have. My 2 cents.
Very true. Sky?
Well, and I think Bill just described the Wild West that I was observing of distribution. And again, it's the distribution of a thing that I'm obviously looking at the value or the price. And to Bill's point, he wanted it now, so he was going to pay that $3.99. And that's what I think the Wild West is. We're still discovering as consumers, what is it that we are willing to put up with and or sacrifice or give to the value of a thing. And we're still figuring it out. Disney, of course, has decades of understanding how to get us to do what they want us to do and what the value price is. And then they will recycle it 20 years from now. They'll bring it back out and it'll be new to the next generation. The last note I'll make is I believe it's the Who franchise, Doctor Who franchise, started putting out entire clips and letting their audience edit together their own versions of the shows. And consequently, it's the engagement of a thing. Now, yesterday, I watched football on television as an observer, as a passive observer. I'm not wanting to be out there on the field getting hit by 300-pound humans, but the engagement versus the passive observation of a thing. I think we're still in the Wild West of all of this consumption.
I like that. An engagement of a thing. You might want to coin that if it isn't already. Nigel?
Hashtag.
Yeah, so I live in the world of homeowners, particularly high-end homeowners. And I can tell you that COVID has had 2 remarkable impacts on us. First is you no longer have to explain why someone needs a good network. They've worked out that an enterprise-class network in a home is a real thing. But the second thing is that 2.5 years ago, you couldn't sell home theaters. They were dead. People weren't interested. Today, private cinemas are something we sell a lot of. Now, there's only so much I can do to make the picture much better. Happy to sell you an 8K laser projector, but yeah, maybe not. The thing that is most impactful at the moment is people fixing their sound systems and the way they listen to this stuff. And there's content being produced by people like Netflix. So I would take Drive to Survive as a good example, the F1 documentary, where they put the effort into the sound. And what we find is high-end clients talk more about, hey, you should have heard the sound on this. Than sometimes they talk about the picture.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think this is a problem in the streaming world. It used to be that you'd advertise, motion pictures would come out and they'd be from different studios and they'd be in theaters and they'd advertise on television. So you have one point where you could concentrate your advertising. But with now streaming services, they're all siloed. And so Disney Plus will promote their new pictures on Disney Plus, and Netflix will promote their new pictures on Netflix. But if you're not a subscriber, you probably won't hear about them except through outdoor advertising. And I've found that outdoor advertising, billboards, which are, disappearing more and more due to, local restrictions, blight. But that's one of the few places I can discover new shows and stuff, because if I don't subscribe to that service, I may never hear about it unless they happen to be advertising in some other media format that I am watching. So that becomes a problem of silification. So if they take a form like outdoor advertising, which a lot of people are exposed to every day, regardless of what they subscribe to and whether they want to or not see it, they'll be exposed to it. So I think we might see a resurgence of outdoor advertising.
Yeah. And sometimes you also find that on social media, word of mouth, they're trusting on that too. Alex?
Yeah, it's funny. Apple's attempted to do something with that in the sense that if you go to the Apple TV app itself, it is actually showing you things being released across all the different platforms that are on the Apple TV network or inside the ecosystem. And so it has a little bit of that. I find that to actually be really confusing, because then I can't figure out which one it's going to and which one it's taking me to. So it's attempting to solve that, and it hasn't done it very well yet. I will say that one other thing that I'm starting to make decisions about is streaming quality. The video quality on Disney Plus and Apple have very high quality streaming solutions. So they're sending us a higher bit rate. HBO being a little bit below that, and Netflix and Hulu being at the bottom. Like, just, we don't care about our video at all kind of compression. So, and you especially see this in dark scenes in YouTube, or in Netflix. YouTube looks better than Netflix does, when it comes to compression quality, especially in dark areas. And it's kind of getting to a point where it's embarrassingly bad. So and I don't know exactly all the bits and pieces. This could be some of the peering agreements that they have with folks, where some folks are doing it, but I've got a very fast connection. I don't, and I'll switch between the services. Like, am I getting a better service on Apple? Like, is it my TV is the question. So I'll watch the same piece of content on Netflix on my from my Apple TV or Apple service, and it's completely different, and black levels are screwed up. There's heavier macro blocking. And so I think that services are going to have to start turning that up. And as a consumer, I would be happy to schedule it. If you want to trickle me the content, I don't need you to turn it right on. If I could say, I want if I had a little button that said higher quality and it's going to take 2 hours to get to me, I'd be totally fine with that. Like, I would patiently schedule when I'm going to watch that movie and then go watch it at the highest quality that I could. But they have to start fixing this, because, the reason I started really paying attention to it is I got Kundun, which you cannot get on the services because of China. So I got the Blu-ray of Kundun when it came out, and I was like blown away at how clear it was, and I forgot what Blu-ray looked like. I just forgot that Blu-ray was so much better. Like, we're in the MP3 world of watching, really bad, like 96K MP3s right now of movies compared to what we had with Blu-ray.
Next question.
Stan Chan is up next from Roseville, and he says, why isn't there more direct camera to cloud solutions coming to market? Seems like it would drive more seamless cloud adoption.
Jason.
Great question. Forget the fact that doing this in a flexible way is complicated and expensive. Forget the fact that Frame.io does this already pretty well, even though they do. The only way to connect the camera to the cloud is with the internet, and bandwidth is something which is sorely lacking both on site, but from a more macro perspective in this country. So till that happens, doesn't matter.
Alex?
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with the rollout of 5G or the lack thereof. So 5G has been a lot of companies have looked at 5G as a way to do direct camera ingest, so that you can do live ingest at low latency. And they've all thought that 5G, I've worked on the tests. so I can tell you that getting, putting a pack on the back of a camera and getting a low latency connection is definitely something a lot of people have thought about for a while. The real issue is that 5G is only available in event locations, at level or high density locations, and it hasn't lined up with what they needed because people, during COVID, haven't been able to go there. And so there's been this real issue as you look at this C-band tussle with the FAA. That will, once that opens up, that may open up a lot more bandwidth. But 4G or LTE is not reliable or robust enough to send the cameras live back. So you need the 5G to do that. That's part of the challenge.
Bill?
Yeah, I had more hope for camera to cloud when it was in Frame.io's original hands. I'm concerned, and I pray I'm totally wrong about this, but the way that Adobe's makes their money through the subscription process and the rest of that, I worry that there's going to be additional gatekeeping into that stream of that, which means that now somebody else has to bring a camera to cloud generic solution up to that level of leadership to give them some competition to enable both of them to go further, faster, and be sensitive to their customers. I'm just a little up in the air about how it's going to work. I know I have spent far less time on Frame since that acquisition than I had before, and I'm sad about that. So, I'll keep my fingers crossed. There's some great people at Adobe, and I hope the calmer, not so business results oriented thinkers manage to grab this and take this camera cloud division in some good directions that benefit everybody rather than just the subscription bottom line.
We'll see what happens in the new year. Next question.
Next one comes from Nick Batt in the UK, and he says, with shortening attention spans and fighting for the wow factor, is there any room for long form anything?
Alex.
Average view time on office hours is 78 minutes. Just keep that math. The long form is possible. It's what the long form does. It's important. There's definitely plenty of people that will watch this for a long period of time. We change the subject relatively often. We dance with the audience, so we're interacting with them. Almost any long form that you see right now is interacting with the audience. So the place that you see long form working is in gaming. So when you're in less public conversations with Twitch, they're talking about average view times of 4 hours and 7 hours and like just insane numbers that we don't see anywhere else. But it's because they're talking to the audience, they're interacting with the audience, and something's changing. And it's unpredictable, and that people are afraid they're going to miss it or they won't be able to go back and find it. And so those are the issues. So you can definitely do long form, but I think that the only way to make long form work is to interact with the audience. Like period. Like I think that is the way to do that. I think that the problem when you get into and when I say long form, I think that anything over 5 minutes is pretty long, So anyway, and so the problem you really get into is what I call content density. So content density is how much information am I giving you at one time, and that is expensive. Creating content density is expensive to do, and so it takes a lot of effort to do it well. I've done a fair bit of TikToking. Like building TikToks for folks. And I'm amazed at how much effort we put into 60 seconds or 30 seconds. And then working with TikTokers, just how much time they spend on prepping and planning and rehearsing something that is only going to be a minute long or 30 seconds long or whatever. And so I think that we have to understand that there's a lot of effort that goes into this piece of content, but that's what makes it. That's why people are so addicted to it, is not because it's short. It's because they've packed a lot into it. We watch feature films because they pack a lot into it too. They're just spending $1 million a minute to do that, And so the thing is when you're competing with those things, you just have to understand where you can do that. And so I think people have a hard time getting people to watch something that is low density content without an interaction for a long period of time is probably not. That's something that's good for audio. So because people are doing something else. I listened to 3 hours of Foreign Affairs yesterday because I was cleaning. And it was great. I was absorbing a bunch of stuff that I wouldn't do. I would never watch that. I would never sit down and watch these pundits talk about intricate issues related to politics and global politics and economic whatever. I would never do that like as a monotasking event, but while I'm shopping and running errands and cleaning and listening to it at 1.5x, like it's totally doable. So,
Mark.
Well, it's hard to follow that, but I would say that long form does face a lot of challenges, a lot of competition. There's a lot of short, our attention span has grown shorter and shorter. But I think if you were to take the long form, break it up into episodes, maybe a season, connect it by a theme, and then you took that storyline and you pushed it out on other platforms and you started to brand that you would see it evolve. And I think that long form has to change it a little bit and become more interactive so that you have a two-way conversation, and that'll make people more interested in because they can participate.
Sky.
As humans, I believe we're embedded with a fight or flight issue or consequence of our species, and consequently, as we live in a commercialized, consumer-based environment, I think this is what I'm looking at. And Nick, I'd love to have a longer conversation with you about this, because the wow factor is just the fireworks. But after a while, you get tired of fireworks, and so you need a rise and fall to Alex's point, a rise and fall of a story. You listen to any good music, you're going to have loud parts and you're going to have quiet parts, so you can again see contrast. And I think the last thing I'll point out is we've seen this happen in history through the news system. If it bleeds, it leads was the common phrase. Again, certain genders see headlines where other part of our species, read the details. I think there is always going to be a opportunity for long form, but it might currently in the next few years be more serialized. And we're seeing that in what was just mentioned, taking the same story, but you're parsing it out a little bit. And of course, that's what we're seeing that Marvel is doing a great job with.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think there is a lot more room for long form right now than there ever has been. Of course, there's social media, which is short attention span theater. That serves that market. But as far as dramatic storytelling that used to be in episodic television or in feature films that were always limited to an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to play in a theater. Now the people that produced that long form type information have gone to streaming, and streaming, you can take your story arc, which you would have to use to fit into an hour and a half or 2 hours, and spread it over an 8-hour 12 episode series with the storyline progressing from episode to episode to episode, and people can stream that and binge watch. You ever heard of binge watching? That's what a lot of people are doing these days, where that's the longest form of media. So I don't think that's disappearing, and that's become a new platform for storytelling. Long form storytelling is streaming and binge watching.
Bill?
I don't know what to think about this, and it's because there's two things pulling at me as a consumer of content. Number one, I love the longer scope stories. I'm a great novel reader. I enjoy that. And sometimes you have to invest yourself in the beginnings. Even in media, I'm thinking about The Girl from the Dragon with the Dragon Tattoo series. I found the first third of that first novel almost excruciatingly boring. The author was building a world, and it was difficult for me to last into that world. Once I did, and once he had grounded me in character and structure, it took off, and I can't tell you something I've enjoyed more than the last 3 novels of that. But boy, I had to get over that hump, and I'm worried now that we're in this world where you get a Transformer movie, and if something doesn't blow up or put everything in jeopardy in the first 80 seconds, it's a failure. And so I hope that the content creators out there understand that simply using the tricks of pulling out a gun or blowing something up or having a car chase isn't a direct substitute for writing something with substance that will last and engage the viewers. I worry about that.
Roscoe?
And sometimes things are so dense that I don't get them on the first pass. I put in a link to Mark Shubin, who I find fascinating to hear talk about all things television historically and looking much into the future. He's the first one that turned me on to the fact that HDR is much more important than 3D and resolution, those type of things. So yeah, sometimes long form is you have to go back after. It doesn't all have to be consumed in one sitting, would be my point. So
Thanks, Roscoe. Next question.
Next question comes from us from our friend Nick Justison, and he says, do panelists anticipate seeing virtual production, green screen, or LED wall used in any of their 2022 productions or projects?
Sky?
I'm being very fortunate to work on a job that's going to be out there on the East Coast in about 3 weeks. And what Blender did for us was allowed us to do a lot of the previs of the LED wall and also the light placements of a thing. And I think the style choice was because of the client is using the server or the service provider because they trust them to help them get their message across. Now, whether it's a green screen or an LED wall, we're having to use an LED wall, but we're having to use it very judiciously as to not overpower the story and or to support the messaging.
And Alex?
Yeah, we're looking more at green screen, more at LED walls than green screen, but very, very high, very tight pitched LED walls for some of the stuff that we're doing later this year. So 0.9 or less than 1 millimeter pitched walls because the larger ones create all these moire issues. The problem with green screen is mostly that it is really hard to key well, especially in high motion blur environments or low light environments. So low light and high motion, both of those things are very hard for us to do well. I mean, we're looking at doing both of those things. We're also looking at having smoke and lighting and visible lighting inside of smoke in front of the background. And those are all the things we don't want to try to key. So having an LED wall makes sense. We just have to deal with the challenges of LED walls. But I will say that an LED wall, a high-pitched LED wall behind someone in HDR is one of the most magical things that you can do. Like, because you have so much light available to you, and it's just like looking into this unbelievable universe that doesn't exist. And so, as we've done a couple of tests now, I'm pretty excited about the possibility of that. But it is something that has its own challenges. And so they're not easy way outs. I think the biggest problem we have is clients that think that LED and green screen are an easy way to add digital. It's not. It's really a hard way to do something well. But wow, when you nail it, it's unbelievable. And so anyway, so that's what we're looking at right now.
All right. And for our final question of the day,
Douglas Carmichael is back with the nod, and he asks, as we move forward and constantly progress, how can we keep the core connections within our community strong?
Alex.
For us, I think that after hours is a big piece of that. So you're going to see us doing more and more inside of after hours, giving people more opportunities to do things on our own, but just having the dead time as well, that we can, Tlaloc took us on a tour today of his farm, that he grew up, his family farm in Texas. And we just got to wander around. It was a sunrise, and we were able to kind of see, and we got a different picture of him, of his family, of something there. And I think that continuing to have the space to do those kinds of things, you'll see us continue to work on that. So, again, we are going to continue, and you'll see me be a little sharper about how office hours runs. It'll be less informal as we prepare it for a wider audience. But you'll at the same time see us creating more and more informal opportunities in after hours and in other areas to interact. And I think that you have to have both of those things. It's kind of a yin and the yang of the process.
Guy.
I'm going to try to go with one word answers. Practice, as Alex has been talking about, and we've observed, and you've observed in yourself. Also giving yourself, believe in yourself that you have the opportunity and you should take it. And so consequently, the opportunities are being given to practice harder, and listening that's where the timing and pacing of something happens. And I'm learning a lot about that over this last year, and looking forward to more in the future.
Bill.
I love the way this exists right now. I think that people coming together just because they've chosen to come together has been the single most exciting and grounding thing that I've done in the past couple of years. I do worry in the long run, because there are some people that I think, well, they were here and now they're gone, and they were valuable and they were really good. I know the reason they are gone is because the calls of making their living or running their businesses or whatever pulled them away from office hours into having to just focus on keeping their lives going. And I hope that as this evolves over the course of the next 10 years, there's some sort of mechanism where people can get something out of office hours if they choose to dedicate almost a full time to it, in such a way that they can justify bringing their expertise and brilliance continually back here, rather than having to balance it with, I have to make my whole living over there, and then I get to go with my friends and enjoy this. And I don't know, Alex, how you're going to have to navigate that, or if you will, or whatever. That is entirely up to you. But I just don't like seeing the missing faces of some of the people who were such sterling contributors. And it's just because they have to go back.
But it does still try to pull her into her own super.
And then I would say intentionality. And we had some of that even yesterday when we went over like clean show. What does that mean? And just everyone recognizing that this is supposed to be a safe space, and that it's an inviting space, and we're making it more accessible, and having those core tenets, which I'm sure Alex is going to come back and speak to, making sure that those core tenets, that we are all being a part of that. And it's not left to a handful of people, but everyone making sure that, oh, okay, that conversation, we might need to table that, or being very inviting in after hours when we see a new face or a new face on the panel. So intentionality, I would say, would be really important. Alex?
My experience is most of the people that we see sometimes on office hours are often in after hours. So they haven't really left the community, or we see them in Discord when it makes sense. And so the time frame for after hours office hours doesn't make sense for everyone, but we see most of the people who are sizable parts of our community are still around. They're in different states, of that. And so I don't feel like we've lost that many folks. And I think that there are occasions when they come on when it makes the biggest difference. And sometimes I'm doing a subject in office hours, and I'll reach out to them and say, hey, can you come in? But I think that what I am excited about is that on any given day, we have a great panel that can answer, the vast majority of the questions that come through. And that's our job in office hours, is really to do that, is to be able to field these questions effectively. And then after hours is really, I view office hours as a service to the community, and a service to the rest of the world. And after hours is the community. So the office hours is a place, and for the community, it's a place for us to have a condensed thing that we're going to go through a lot of data. It's also a place for people to get better known. I mean, I think that if Todd Reynolds, for instance, had just been in after hours and did a couple things every once in a while, the chances of him getting a bunch of people that wanted to help put together something around him would be much lower. It's the fact that he was really part of the office. So office hours itself is a great opportunity for people who have something to contribute to become a leader within that community, and to benefit from that over time in indirect sort of ways. So I think that I think it's a lost opportunity when they have the time to not come on office hours. But I think that when I think of the community, I think of Discord and after hours, and I think of office hours as a service that we provide to that community and to the rest of the world. So that's all I got. Anything else, Liberty?
Not right now. Just inviting everyone, if you are still tuned in, to join us in after hours. And thank you so much for watching us today. And I will hand it back to you, Alex.
Thanks, Liberty. Great work. Just a reminder that tomorrow we'll do the same thing, but we'll just talk mostly about audio, probably radio too, a little bit. And but we'll talk about audio. This week is a introspective week where we're going to kind of think through a lot of those things. Remember that Wednesday could be very busy. I would recommend that if you're interested in having the conversation with everyone that's coming, I would get here early. We do have a limited number of seats, and we don't know how far this is going to get promoted or what's actually going to happen over the next couple of days. It may be the same number of people. It could be much larger. So I would get here earlier than later on Wednesday. And otherwise, we'll jump into after hours. All right. See you there.